Welcome to The Art of Show, where we feature the people who are creating amazing stories for kids. Join us as we chat with children's book illustrators and authors, storyboardists, animators, and more. Now, their art might be for kids, but aren't we all just kids at heart? Here's your host, Brandon.
All right, what is up, guys? Welcome back to The Art of Show, episode number 4 with Dan Yaccarino. I'm very excited to have him on the podcast today. We're going to dive into his bio here in just 1 second. A couple housekeeping things before we do that. Number 1 is during this interview, it was great, but we did it over Skype. And so if you guys have ever listened to Skype or done Skype yourself, sometimes it can be a little bit wonky. So there's going to be a couple times where you're going to hear the audio go flat or you're going to see him freeze up on the screen, but then it catches back up and then we get rolling again. So hang in for those because this is a great interview. We talk about all kinds of different stuff. So be sure and hang in for that. And if you guys like what we're doing with the podcast and the videos over on YouTube, you guys can leave a rating and review on iTunes. If you go to BrandonCullum.com/review and leave a rating and review, that is the number one way that you can help support the show. So let's get into Dan's bio just a little bit. Like I said, he is a children's book author as well as illustrator. Just came out with a book called I Am Story, or I Am a Story, which is great. And the actual hero of the story is the story itself. So it's a little bit of meta, but it's really cool. It kind of walks through what a story is throughout history. So all the way from cavemen all the way up to today. Beautiful illustrations. Dan's style is so unique. His background is not in kids lit, but actually working for the Rolling Stone, doing stuff for magazines and newspapers. So it kind of comes from that editorial side of things, and you can definitely feel that in his illustrations. Super colorful, but they're also really simple, but really, really effective. Great style, and he's been putting out tons of books. I think he said his first book came out in '93. So he's been at it for quite some time. We get into all kinds of topics, from what it's like to write and illustrate your own books versus to illustrate someone else's book. We get into traditional versus digital. If you guys have ever wondered that, it's kind of been a big thing, especially in the art community, as folks have kind of transitioned to computers to help speed up their workflow. But he has some really interesting thoughts on how he composes his art in his head before he actually puts that out, because he had to back in the day because he had really fast turnarounds, and this kind of how that's affected his current style. Get into who he'd love to create a book with. It's a pretty fun people who are over the board, but Dan's a great guy and he's doing some amazing stuff. Also, he is a producer at Nickelodeon, has some shows out there, including the Backyardigans as well as Oswald. And so if you guys have little kids, really good chance you probably, or they have watched some of his shows. And so he talks a little bit about kind of how the television industry influences his kids' book world, and especially the differences he finds between the both. So really, really interesting stuff there. Before we get into the interview, though, give you guys a little bit of update from my side of things. Working on a new book right now, playing around with it, especially on the speed on getting it out. And so the goal is to have it out, I think, by the end of the first week of December. So at the time of this recording, that's going to be a little over a month. And the way I'm doing that is about space, and you guys can follow along in the progress, as well as you can actually vote on some of the things that are going to happen in the story. If you go to Brandon Cullum, CULLUM /space, and you'll have a page there where you can kind of join the team. Not only can you vote on the story, but you also get a free electronic copy at the end. But it's going to be all about friendship and loneliness in space. And because I'm a NASA nerd, I'm actually using NASA images as the background. So the characters are on top of those images because those are free and public domain. You can do whatever you want with them. And so we'll have some historical stuff in it, but it's really about this kid and what it's like to be alone in space, and as well as what it's like to find friends. So be sure and check that out. But without further ado, let's dive into our interview with Dan. Kind of as we're getting going, from what I've seen, you didn't have a very traditional route to kids' books. It started with Rolling Stones. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I was coming out of school. I was a commercial illustrator.
Okay.
So I would do illustration work for a lot of different magazines like Rolling Stone and New York Magazine and Business Week and all these different magazines. And I also did a lot of book covers.
Okay.
And a lot of commercial work. posters, ad campaigns, and different things like that. I did that for a few years, and about 5 years into being an illustrator, I met a children's book editor, and I was asked if I had any ideas for books, and I came up with an idea, and that was 23 years ago.
Geez, so was it 93 then? Was that your first book?
That was the first book was published in 93.
Did you grow up around kids' books, or was that?
Not really. We would go to the library. We were big library people, but, we really didn't have any picture books. I grew up, taking some picture books out of the library, but mostly it was comic books. It was what else? Just anything like I even would save little bits of packaging, stuff that I liked, the cereal box or wrapper of gum or something like that. I sort of grabbed things from all over, and a lot of the things that I looked at, other than a small handful of picture books and some of this other stuff, was a lot of animation and a lot of movies and things like that. So we really weren't, my brother and sister and I, we really weren't read to, but we did have, we did actively go to the library and pick up books. So I didn't set out to be a picture book illustrator or even an author really in the beginning, but once I got a taste of it, or I can write and illustrate and design and, all that, it was something I took to, immediately.
Yeah. What was it about that? Was it just the ability to kind of create your own world, or what was it about the kids' books that?
It's a very particular art form where I think that over the years I've sort of learned that a good picture book, the manuscript and the illustration sort of lean on each other, and they're sort of, I would say, incomplete without the other. So you reading this manuscript alone, you get some of the idea of what it's about and some of the story and some of the character, but not quite all. And just by looking at the illustrations, you're not quite getting all the information either. So it's this kind of blend between the two where they need each other and they're sort of intertwined. And I've learned that is a particular art form. It took me a long time to even understand that much of it. I strive to achieve that in my own work. But it's unlike, because I write for television as well, and it's very much unlike television, and it's even different from that. It's its own unique thing. And it's not lesser than an adult book. It's not sort of a more elaborate version of a board book. It's its own thing. It's its own art form. And I just fell in love with it as soon as I started creating picture books. I took to it so quickly. And it is, yes, part of it is creating your own world and your own characters and, the story that they go through. It's just, to me, there's nothing like it.
Yeah. Now, did you write, so that first book you did in 93, were you also the author on that?
Yeah.
So, and you've just illustrated on several as well. Is that right?
Yes. These days I'm doing more writing and illustrating, but there was a period in my career where I illustrated probably more than I wrote and illustrated.
Gotcha.
But I am open to accepting manuscripts that speak to me that I think are, I'm not going to turn that down. I want that for myself.
Yeah.
So I'm still very much open to that, but more often than not, I am writing and illustrating my own work. But again, I'm always open to a really great manuscript. I'm not going to turn it down. Yeah.
What has it been like working on your own stories versus working on other stories that get put in front of you? Is your process kind of the same, or does it look different?
No. It's not at all the same. It's sort of like, I liken it to when you're illustrating someone else's manuscript. It's almost like, in a sense, you're in the passenger seat of the car. A lot of the stuff has already been worked out, and you're there to not only to enhance and embellish, but in many ways create your own half of the story. And the telling of it is visual. They did their job, setting down the story and the character's goal and all of that. But my job is to inhabit this world and create this environment, populate it, and and pretty much invent a whole universe. And even if it is, someone's house or, maybe someone's backyard or a neighborhood or a city or whatever, I'm still inventing that. It's still not just sort of a standard issue kind of place. I always try to create something different, new with it. But when you're writing and illustrating, I find that to be similar to my experience in creating, producing animated television, which I've done a few shows, and all the burden is on you. All of it, everything is on you. You have to figure out absolutely everything, and it's exhilarating and it's fun and it's exciting. And sometimes there's a lot of weight on you to figure absolutely everything out. You can't blame anybody else, that's for sure. So these are totally, for me, they're very different experiences.
Yeah. What has it been like in the TV world and then the kids book world? Are you still actively in both areas?
Yes.
Do you find that they kind of speak into each other, like the things that you're finding?
There's a little overlap.
Okay.
There is overlap. The process is entirely different. When I'm writing and illustrating my picture books, it's mostly myself, my editor, and then a little bit later down the process comes the art director, and they'll chime in, and then we'll all sort of collaborate. And it is a very collaborative process, but there's only maybe two other people.
Yeah.
When you're working in television, it's a total group effort.
Yeah.
There's so many small pieces that you could not possibly do it on your own or even with a small team. To produce a television show, you need 100 or 200 people, staff of people doing every little facet of that show. And whenever I'm doing a show, I'm sort of, my role is, I would consider, I'm called a producer, but I consider myself quality control in a sense, to keep it on the track, the vision. I'm all for other people's ideas to be contributed. I love that. That's the fun part of actually working on a show. Is I've always tried, whenever I staffed up a show, is to try to find writers, designers, storyboard artists, all these people that are way more talented than me.
Yeah.
I want to be the least talented person in the room. So then I can learn, and obviously the quality of it goes up. I don't like to micromanage people. Once I hire them, I usually let them go, because the reason why I hired them is because I like their work. So I let them go. They can put their thumbprint on the show, and I think it's important that everyone that works on a production feels ownership over it. And that's the environment that I try to inspire whenever I'm working on one of my shows. But with picture books, again, it's a very small, tight group of people that work, and you meet with marketing and you meet with a couple other people there, but mostly it's myself and my editor. And those books are more of I would have to say, more of a pure version of my idea, rather than with television. It just simply can't be. There's just too many people involved.
Yeah.
So you have to sort of guide the way, but it's not going to be the same. That's what was in your head.
Yeah, yeah. With your books, do you find there's kind of a theme that they kind of circle around over the years? Is there like something that kind of ties them together, or are they just kind of all over the place?
I look at them, sort of individually,
Okay.
but I bet if someone, other than myself would, take a long look at all of these books, and they'll come back and say, most of your books deal with, I don't know what,
Yeah.
I really don't know. I think because I'm so on top of them and I've lived them, these are all, whenever somebody writes, it's an aspect of themselves.
Right.
So I'm like the worst person to ask for the theme of my books. I have no idea. I'm just doing them, and I'll let somebody else analyze them, I guess.
That's good. Do you have a favorite when you think back, or are they all kind of favorite in your own?
I'll tell you what. Mostly the favorite book is the one that I'm working on. It has to be.
Yeah.
Because it's a long haul, and you got to love it. But looking back, there are some titles that I guess I have a personal connection to for one reason or another. But I love all the books. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done them. I put my all into everything that I do. So, I did a book for my son. I did a book for my daughter. But the reason why those pop up is because it's for them. It's not that I put more effort into them. But no, I would say that I feel the same about all of them. I love them, except for the one that I'm working on, at whatever particular moment. That one I love more.
You love more, yeah.
And then go to the other side, and then I'll love the next one. So.
Yeah. So where do the ideas come from? Do you start out with a sketch, or do you start out with just an idea and then you start writing, or does it depend?
That's a good question. Sometimes the ideas come from just a drawing, and I'll sit with it and I'll look at it and I'll start thinking about it and what could this character do or what could happen. Sometimes they come out as text. I'll just type it out on my laptop and it'll just be a couple of sentences. It comes from all over the place for me. I don't have one way. I guess I don't have one way of developing these ideas. I think they sort of come from a variety of places.
Mm-hmm. So kind of walking through just your process, do you start then with the story written out? And then you kind of illustrate to the story, or with a book dummy, or is it also kind of depend?
Well, you're making me think about all this stuff.
Sorry.
I guess more or less what I do is I will, if I have ideas about text, I'll write them down. But a lot of times I will try to do a thumbnail dummy of the book with no text.
Okay.
And see if I can put the idea across with that, either no text or at least as little text as possible. Because, really, a picture book, the pictures tell most of the story, and the text, in my opinion, should be something that cannot be conveyed visually. So you have this image, if the guy's wearing whatever, a red hat, the last thing the text should say is he's wearing a red hat. I think more it should be, it was Thursday and he was wearing his favorite hat. Those are things that I can't necessarily or easily illustrate. So I always try to reserve the text for the stuff that is sort of sort of an emotional undercurrent or just information that cannot be conveyed visually. And so therefore, the text will lean on the images, and the images require a little more explanation from the text. So I guess I do start off more or less with a thumbnail dummy and then just write some text notes, if I have an idea for a phrase or something like that in there. But mostly they develop visually, I guess.
And do you work traditionally, digitally, kind of all of it?
Up until about 5 years ago, I had been working traditionally, and the last batch of books have been all digital.
Yeah.
I'll start off with, I'll sit down and I'll do an ink line drawing on some vellum, and then I'll have it, I'll scan it in, and then I'll open it up and I'll color it and manipulate it and move it around. But it all does start off with actual brush and ink.
Yeah. What was that transition like? I know we've chatted with a lot of folks that have kind of gone through that, but what was that like for you with computers and everything?
Very curious. It was a little bumpy, and I was very curious about it.
Yeah.
And I decided the only way that I'm going to learn this, rather than try to do these little pieces here and there with no expectation, no schedule, I decided, the next book I'm going to do, and I will tell the publisher, it's going to be digital. And I had to kind of figure it out after that. Fortunately, I had some friends that I could ask about certain aspects of photo, because I was working in Photoshop. And I essentially forced myself to learn by committing myself to a book. And I figured that's the only way I'm going to do this, because otherwise, with no schedule and no expectation, I'll just kind of flit around and probably never commit to really learning it.
Yeah. Have there been things that you found that you can do easier after you transitioned, or things that you found that are harder? Or
I'd say by now, after doing it for a few years, I think that I'm able to. I use it sometimes, but I have to tell you, not very often, to swap out colors, which would be very difficult to do traditionally. You'd have to paint over it. And when I paint in gouache on watercolor paper, and forget about trying to put another layer. It's disaster.
Yeah.
Up the other layer and it turns into mud, and you don't want to do that. So, but the thing is, and I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine exactly about this kind of stuff, about digital versus traditional. And I certainly started the first part of my career has been traditional. And because of that, and because of being sort of trained, I guess, in doing commercial work, which was due very, very quickly. I would do a piece for a magazine. They'd call me up they'd say, we need a sketch by the end of the day, and then we need to finish tomorrow. So there's not a lot of time. So I had to learn to work very quickly, come up with a sketch, send it to them. They'd call me back and say, let's go with whatever, this one. And I'd have to knock it out in an evening and then have it ready the next day. So I had to make decisions about color and shape and design and all that very, very quickly. And I guess that kind of carried over into the books. And whenever I'm planning a piece, as I had done even when I was still working traditionally, I sort of plan it out in my head. I arrange the colors inside my head, and I switch through them. What would this look like if the background was green? That's not going to work. Purple, orange, and of course it affects everything ahead of that, in the foreground. So I've been doing this so long that I still do that in my head. And 99% of the time when I'm working digitally, I won't noodle around with colors because I already worked out the color scheme in my head. And the conversation I was having was people that are being sort of raised or trained, I guess, digitally. I find, because I had been I teach once in a while. I taught at Parsons School of Design in New York. I taught a couple of times. I do encounter people still college age working, and I find that a lot of them tend to noodle endlessly with this stuff. And I just realized, well, it's generational because they never had to commit and put down a giant, brush stroke of gouache and commit to it.
Yeah.
And they have the luxury of, sort of noodling away, saying, well, if it's purple or green or orange or blue, and I never had that. And I still approach digital work the same exact way. So this is it, so I think it's a big difference, but it is convenient. You can move things around, you can keep things away from the gutter and stuff like that. I mean, but I feel like even when I was working traditionally, I guess I'm relaxing a little bit because I know I have that luxury to be able to noodle a little bit. I'm not saying I'm getting lazy or sloppy. Right. I'm just saying that I know that if need be, I don't have to do the whole painting over again.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I've never heard someone explain it. The fact that you're working out, like I've heard people talk about they're working out the characters in their heads and they're posing all that kind of stuff, but the actual color piece of it too. That's really cool. So I'm a Story. Where did that come from? Was that a sketch or was that a?
That was actually, that was a full-blown idea that just kind of downloaded into my head. And I don't know where it came from. Somewhere in the cosmos, I just started writing this thing down. I didn't draw anything. That was one book where I just sat down at my laptop and just started writing. The first line was, I am a story. And it was, I'd say maybe 60, 70% of that very original manuscript was the same order. And then, of course, I did a lot more research and, there was some editing involved and all, but really good portion of that book just, it's right on the screen, I typed it right up and that was it. And of course, then I started Googling, like, has this been done before? Has someone else done this? And I just sort of, stole somebody else's idea subconsciously. And I think that those are the ideas that we all look for. This has to have been done before, or why hasn't this been done before?
Yeah.
And so I got very excited. I created a dummy for it very, very quickly and sent it to my agent. She absolutely loved it. And so it's published by Harper. And it was just a pure joy working with my editor, Nancy Intelli, and Rick Farley, the designer, and they just totally got it. And that, what a great experience that was.
Yeah. And I like it because it's almost like the color scheme, it doesn't change, but it's very unique, each of the spreads. So it's not like you're pulling kind of the same look to each one. Each page jumps out at you. It's so cool.
Thank you.
It reminds me a little bit when you mentioned, has this been done before? It's totally not the same, but Matt Barnett and Adam Rex, they did how this book is made. And so it was actually walking through, it goes to the publisher, it goes to the agent and all that kind of stuff. But the idea of a story going through history is so cool.
Yeah.
Now how is it, as you've read it, or if you had like kids interact with it, what's kind of the reaction been as they're kind of walking through it?
Well, one question that keeps coming up is, why were books burned?
Yeah,
why would you burn a book?
Yeah. When I was watching the video preview, I was like, oh man, he's like including this too. Like this is good.
It's part of it.
Yeah.
It's a harsh part of the story, but I usually, this is usually at school visits, I say, you may want to ask your teacher about that one. I'm not getting involved in that, but it does inspire discussion. It does inspire, the last third of the book, most of it is about actual books, but the first part of the book is about all these different ways that stories are conveyed. So it's not really about books per se; it's about story. Mm-hmm. And I started thinking about. I guess I had been thinking about it a little bit, but like I said, when I wrote it, I just sort of wrote it all in one shot. But I was thinking about a story being this kind of ephemeral thing that we pass along, that is passed along verbally, and then it's sort of like, it's becoming reincarnated into these different vessels over time. That vessel dies, the carved tablet, nobody's really using those anymore. It's being born into papyrus scrolls. And then after that, it's something else. So I kind of thought about it as a spirit that gets reincarnated over and over again through time.
That's real cool. Do you have a favorite spread from it?
I really like the spread of the king with the little boy and the tapestry, and the book was selected for the Society of Illustrators original art show, so they asked for me to choose a piece, so I chose that one. So it's nice and big and framed and hung on the wall. I really enjoyed doing that piece, so I thought it was the most colorful and fun, and the knights are there, and you can see them, and one's peeking at the little boy, and there's a lot of detail in the tapestry. I guess I have an emotional attachment to that, and that's why I chose it, perhaps.
Yeah, that's cool. Are there elements of the story that you just kind of had to edit out? Like, cause I can imagine there's just hundreds of different scenes you could have put in there. Are there some that you kind of had to pull out from it?
Well, nothing's coming to me off the top of my head, but there were a lot of different, smaller subsets of different means of conveyance that this really doesn't warrant a full page. It doesn't even warrant a spot. I think what I tried to do and working with my editor was to come up with the highlights, really. And we did. I feel like there's not a whole lot of things we missed, and the things that we chose to leave out were probably a bit more obscure and would probably raise more questions, which is not a bad thing, but I felt like it would hurt the flow of the book. So we left a couple of things out. I think we hit all the right spots. And then then there's a portion of the book towards the end where it does kind of veer off and talk about the importance of books or stories and things like that. So it's not really, originally, which is this kind of chronological list, which was really boring. It had to have some detours and some embellishment. And I feel like the part about censorship and book burning, that's necessary, really. And, and it does inspire conversation. So I thought that was necessary to put that in, even though it was a bit of a detour from the pattern we set up for the first part of the book. Yeah.
And even just thinking of it, a story arc, I guess, to the story, like that's kind of your tension point. You're like, there it is. There's a conflict. So that's good.
Yeah, you picked up on that. Excellent. Yeah. Good. All right.
Well, there's always some questions we'd like to ask kind of as we're wrapping up. To the folks we have on. And the first is, since you have collaborated with some folks in the past, but if you could collaborate on a book, doesn't necessarily have to be an author, but just anybody because you've been kind of all over the creative industries, is there someone you think it'd be really fun to work with? I think someone last time told me like David Sedaris, they would like to write a book with him. So
I can do him now. Well, I have a couple of ideas for books. I would love to, I'd love to somehow work with the stop motion animator Henry Selick, who I've been missed amount of respect. I met him once and we talked, and I would give anything to work with Henry. Also, I have an idea for a picture book biography about Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, who I'm a massive fan.
Yeah.
Fan. So that's with my editor at the moment. And so fingers crossed on that one, which will get me that much closer to actually meeting him. I'm not doing it for just that reason. But it would be a great perk.
So would it be like his life, like, or Beach Boys? Okay, gotcha.
It would be like a blend of the band and him.
Those illustrations would look so cool. Yeah.
Fan, just a giant fan.
Yeah.
So I would love to do something like, like that. I mean, I guess that's not a collaboration, but I would certainly, seek out his approval, there's that movie and there's a new biography and all that. So, but, yeah, I mean, there's just, I'm trying to think of, you're ambushing me here with this question.
Sorry, I need to send it beforehand. I apologize.
No. But off the top of my head, yeah, and maybe the Dalai Lama. Let's throw him in there.
Yeah, just
in case he's watching. I'll do your picture book biography.
Perfect.
So
that'll be good. That's awesome. So you mentioned you have a son and a daughter. Is it? So you have 2 kids. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So if you had to pick a book that's not yours to read them, like as like they could only have one, basically right. Asking kind of what is your favorite kids book? But if it's
like a Sophie's Choice right there, though, it's. Well, I'll tell you, I would read to them they're teenagers now, but okay. I would read to them every night, and I would say the books that resonated the most with my kids and myself, because I was reading them again, but this time I'm reading to my children, were a bunch of, we got all of them actually, Beverly Cleary, the Ramona books. But I have to tell you, there's one book in there, and if you recall, there was a character named Henry Huggins, who was like a neighbor, little boy. He had a dog named Ribsy, and she wrote a book about Ribsy, and it was the most riveting and just an emotional roller coaster for my kids. They were weeping, and I had to read no, I can't. You got to go to bed. Like, no, one more chapter. Oh! So it was. I love her work. I think she's brilliant, and she just knew kids, because those books were written 40 years earlier. My kids were, on the floor crying. I mean, I have nothing but respect for her. Any of the Ramona books, in particular, I'd say Ribsy would be the one, because it's just so well written, so beautiful. It's about a dog. It's about the dog's point of view. It's not even about a person necessarily. So I remember that was a highlight. I mean, I read, like I said, I would read. When they were very young, I would read like 3 or 4 picture books in a night. But then they got older, and so we graduated up to chapter books. And I remember Beverly Cleary, Eleanor Estes, those were really the books that really spoke to the kids.
That's good. That's real good. Well, as we're wrapping up, what is the best way for folks to kind of keep up with you on what you're doing? Any good spots you want to direct them to?
Sure. Yaccarinostudio.com is my website. So anytime there's a new book, and also my tour schedule or appearance schedule is on there. Any news with new television projects. I'm working on a few television things right now. And also my blog. So it's actually, you can find a link to my blog on my website. So you can check in there, and, I just was on tour for the new book. So I posted a bunch of things on there throughout the tour. If I have any appearance coming up, I'll post it on the blog. But yeah, those are the 2 places. And then I'm on, Twitter and Facebook. So, friend or like, or whatever you're supposed to do with those things.
That's good. And I'm a Story, just anywhere you can buy books. Is that?
I'm hoping it's also anywhere you can't buy books.
Oh, like, awesome.
Gas station.
Yeah.
Pharmacy.
Okay.
Anywhere. No, it's out there. It's at Barnes and Noble. It's, and everywhere, it's obviously on Amazon and all that. So, it's out there.
Well, good stuff. Well, we appreciate your time, and illustrations are amazing. Stories are so much fun to check out. So we look forward to watching all the ones in the future. And as you're leaving, do you actually have any that you're working on now that you can talk about?
Hang on one second.
Oh, okay.
A new book coming out in the spring. Morris Mole.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's about a little mole who's lived underground his whole life and discovers, above ground for the first time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I wanted, actually, the thought behind that book was, I want someone who lives in darkness his whole life, thinks one way, and then suddenly discovers there's a whole world if you just, sort of seek it out. So that's the new book.
That's cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate your time, and look forward to seeing that one come out and all the future works you have coming.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And thank you for what you do. Fantastic.
My pleasure. I enjoy doing it.